is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. Oh my goodness, we are on day 10 of the Iran war maneuvering military operation, whatever it is the hell they're calling it. And boy are my arms tired. I have a lot of stuff on Iran tonight, but there's some other stuff. We're gonna start with the other stuff. We'll get to Iran, but I want to remind everyone to sign up for the Cameron Journal newsletter, cameronjournal.substack.com or cameronjournal.com/newsletter. You can sign up for that. On Saturday, I did a big article on Iran and AI and drones. We'll remember drones. We're coming back to that. Did all the big stories on all of that stuff and wanted to just kind of go over all of that. And I was sitting this weekend thinking about what I was going to write about, and I'm kind of like, I want to write about AI, I want to write about drones, I want to write about Iran, and it's all kind of connected, so I'm just going to write one big thing. So if you want that type of content delivered right to your inbox, you need to sign up for the Cameron Journal newsletter. If you want to support this journalism, the videos, the content, all the stuff I put out, please don't forget to either subscribe to be a paying subscriber of my Substack for $8 a month, or you can join Cameron Journal Plus. So cameronjournal.com/subscribe. You get access to the private Cameron Journal Discord. One of the things I am launching here soon, as we have some people, is post-NewsHour Hangout. So while I'm sitting here doing distribution, all this type of thing, we'll debrief on Discord and have a lot of fun. I'm also launching my Salon series here soon. Those are going to be free to Cameron Journal Plus subscribers, but will be paid for the public. So that's all very exciting. All of that is happening, so please go check all that out. Obviously, I'm everywhere on social media, and all those links are both at cameronjournal.com or cameronjournal.substack.com. And so it's a good thing. So yeah, I'm very active on Twitter, Instagram, all this type of thing. One of the new things I've been doing is doing a lot more carousel and photo posts and all this type of thing. So if you want to get my latest thoughts on current events and writing and the marketing external messaging stuff I do in Cameron Journal for Business, then you're going to want to follow me on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, at Cameron Journal on TikTok. So with all of that done, let's dive into the headlines. Let's do this. I need to change my screen background at some point. And let's also change this overlay, because that's for The Living Joke, my other show that I do with Will and Connor, which they'll be here on Wednesday. So make sure to come back for that. And we're going to get into the SAVE Act, because President Trump has said he's not going to sign anything until the SAVE Act is passed. So let's dive right into that in this story from The Hill. Says here, Trump says he won't sign any bills into law until Save America Act passes. President Trump on Sunday threatened to not sign any bills into law until the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or SAVE America Act, is approved by the Senate, doubling down on his push to change voting requirements ahead of the midterm elections. Quote, I, as president, will not sign other bills until this is passed, and not the watered-down version go for the gold, must show voter ID and proof of citizenship, no mail-in ballots except for military, illness, disability, the president wrote in his Sunday morning Truth Social post. The White House did not respond to a request for comment on whether the president will sign a bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security amid the partial government shutdown. The leader has pressed Senate Majority Leader John Thune to use a talking filibuster to pass the bill, which was approved by the House in February. The filibuster would force Democrats to speak continuously on the Senate floor to delay a vote on the bill, but if they cede the floor, Republicans could circumvent the need for a 60-vote majority and pass the measure with just 51 votes. On Sunday, Trump again urged Thune to use this tactic to get the bill across the finish line. Quote, great job by hardworking Scott Presser on Fox and Friends talking about using the filibuster, or talking filibuster, in order to pass the Save America Act, an 88% issue with all voters, the president wrote, referring to the conservative activist. Quote, it must be done immediately. It supersedes everything else. Must go to the front of the line, unquote, he continued. Thune, who ran for the Senate Majority Leader under the commitment to uphold the 60-vote threshold, has not budged on his stance despite Trump's pressure. The Save America Act has ample support from House Republicans and has already passed the lower chamber 3 separate times over the years. Democrats, however, have pushed back on the measure, claiming it would pose challenges for registered voters and potentially inhibit people from heading to the polls. The Hill has reached out to the White House as well as Thune's and House Speaker Mike Johnson's offices for comment. And so, I mean, that summarizes it summarizes it quite well. But it's definitely a bold move, a move ahead of the midterms in terms of getting voter ID passed and going. I I was pissed a lot of people off several years ago when I wrote an article for the Cameron Journal called "Why I Agree with Voter ID." Traditionally, most Democrats have not been too hot to trot on voter ID. I think voter ID is a good idea. The problem with the Save America Act is a couple provisions. One is it significantly disenfranchises married women because their ID and their marriage certificate and ID and everything has to all match with the same last name, and a lot of women haven't redone those documents, so there'd kind of be a mass disenfranchisement there. Two, um, banning mail-in ballots. There's no indication in any data thus far that mail-in voting is any less secure than in-person voting. That's kind of a ballywick that's happened post 2020 because of all the changes that states and board of elections did around the pandemic to keep people from gathering. A lot of states that didn't have mail-in voting massively expanded it, and that has fed into some of the 2020 election questions and, well, in my opinion, conspiracies around the 2020 election. And so this whole, banning mail-in ballots is so you can't, ballot dump, because people don't understand that when you're looking at voting returns through the night, the fact that 3,000 votes came in at 4 o'clock in the morning does not mean someone's dumping ballots. It means some hardworking person who's been feeding ballots into a machine finally had a count for whatever ballots that were. A lot of states don't even allow county clerks to count ballots until the election has occurred. So you end up with all of the, you end up with like, oh, that's the military votes coming in that have sat in a box until the election day, and then some person's feeding them into a machine doing the count, and then when they kind of get through them all and verify them all, deal with the issues, all this type of thing, it all goes up on the website in one giant update. It's not fraud, it's just admin sort of thing. All of that has led to being like, oh, mail-in ballots are unsafe, especially in states where they allow people to gather up votes of other people who maybe can't turn theirs in, all this type of thing. It's also going to be awkward for two states that only vote by mail, which are Utah and Washington State. Both of those states will have to, if it passed today, they would have, it's March, 8 months to build out in-person voting infrastructure that they haven't had in years. In terms of, elderly people, they're going to have to get waivers for all this type of thing. It's going to be an administrative nightmare. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's a funny thing with mail-in voting. And so yeah, this with all of this stuff and the ID and citizen proof requirements, one, a lot of Americans don't even have all those documents. So there's going to be a rush to get them in order to vote. And then you're going to have all the admin of that. It's going to cause absolute and utter chaos for the midterms. But I think, in my humble opinion, that's the point. But this is an interesting and very bold statement. And I think it may come back to haunt him on the DHS funding. I think voter ID is a good idea. And I think, I think you should have a wide variety of IDs. For instance, like student IDs don't count as IDs for voting. I don't think that's really fair. You have, all these kind of very high requirements, even though we don't have a ton of evidence that we have a massive voter fraud problem or that we have a lot of immigrants voting. A lot of those are tropes and ideas that, when you actually go look at voting and ballot data, don't really seem to bear out. It was kind of funny. I had someone on the show early last year who was a Republican pollster. We were talking about the polls leading up to 2024 and how wrong they were, and the confusion of polling in the Trump era and all this type of thing. But one of the kind of interesting things that we got into was, this question about ballots and voting and all this type of thing. And the only thing I would remind President Trump about in this whole process is that okay, you felt like you got cheated in 2020. You spent a fortune trying to find something wrong. Didn't really. We've never addressed the whole fake electors scandal that happened and whatnot. And because Jack Smith was testifying about that the other week, we talked about that. We never got into all that. We never got into the people in Michigan that were trying to do that or all this. We didn't get never into all that, but we did get into all the problems with the voting system. The same voting system that got him elected in 2016, but that he lost in 2020, but that got him back in 2024. And you'll notice all the issues and all this are about the 2020 election, not the 2024 election, because that's the one he lost. Are we sensing a pattern here? So yeah, this is a lot of people who've had a lot of accessibility to vote are going to find out they don't have it anymore. And a lot of local county clerks who are required to, canvass for voters, and some people, most of them are going to have a very terrible time figuring all of this out. And I'm not saying that people don't have IDs to present and that they shouldn't be presenting ID to match with the voter roll, all this type of thing. Great, that's fine. But when you're restricting what types of IDs, you're requiring all these documents that people don't have, that's going to be a problem for people, and it's going to end up disenfranchising people. One of the things we used to say back in the day, I don't know that modern data promotes this anymore. This is not true anymore. But back in the day, we always used to joke that when turnout is down, Republicans tend to win. And when turnout is high, Democrats tend to do a lot better. And that was true in 2020. We had legendary voter turnout in 2020 because we radically expanded who could vote. And as fate would have it, that election went in a Democrat direction. So that, at least in that instance, was still true. I don't know if that's true for other races or other election periods, but that was still true for then. And I also, one of the things that I always laughed about in the lawsuits after the 2020 election is that the Trump lawyers were always making the argument that the only part of the ballot that was eligible for fraud or could be fraudulent was just people voting for president. That all the other races were honest, but that was the one where the rigging and fraud was happening. And I always thought that was a very odd and funny argument because it kind of showed you narratively where this was going. And it's also kind of sloppy because if something was really going to happen, you think they'd only pick that one. Grab a few Senate seats and House seats while you're at it. If you're going to go to all the trouble, you might as well go for the trifecta, right? So anyway, Trump says he's not sending any bills till the Save America Act passes. It's going to make it a lot harder to vote for people. And I feel sorry for Utah and Washington. So moving right along. Speaking of this, Gavin Newsom kind of was doing a talk in front of reporters and is kind of talking about the present situation. Well, let's watch and we'll talk.
Well, I think it's pretty sick and pathetic. And it just said everything you need to know, the setting that we're under. That they chose the time, manner, and place to send their district director outside right when we're about to have this press conference. Said everything you know about Donald Trump's America. And that was top down. You know that for a fact. They'll deny it, I'm sure. Maybe they won't deny it. Said everything you know about the authoritarian tendencies of the President of the United States. I said in a moment ago, wake up, America. Wake up. You will not have a country if he rigs this election. You will have a president who will be running for a third term. Mark my word. I wasn't exaggerating when I said that I received in the mail a Trump 2028 hat from one of his biggest supporters. These guys are not screwing around. The rules do not apply to him. The most corrupt president in history. He doesn't believe in free enterprise, crony capitalism. He is wrecking this country, wrecking the economy. He's a lawless president. Wake up, America. Wake up to what's going on.
It's an interesting message. Obviously, Gavin Newsom's running for president in 2028. And because I will enjoy Brian Allen. He's connect the dots. The domestic response force deploys in April. The Epstein files are being resealed behind new investigations. Pam Bondi announced that they're not releasing any more Epstein files. We'll come back to that. And it's all of this is coming together, and obviously, suspicion by certain people, and certainly on a certain side of the aisle, is very high that the midterm election will not be honest. It may be the last election, and Trump's going to try to run for a third term. Now, I worry about the 2026 election for all the reasons I just outlined with the Save America Act. I don't think Trump's running for a third term, and I'll tell you why. I think he's very tired of this whole president thing, and I think he wants to go out on top. I think he likes to throw that out there to stir the pot because that's his pattern. It gets people talking. Look at us sitting here talking about it. We have once again fallen into his trap. He gets people talking. It gets people worried. It gets people on the back foot. And that's what he wants them. He wants you off your stance. He wants you on the back foot, not sure what to believe, not sure what he's going to do next because he doesn't know what he's going to do next. All this type of thing. It's part of the game, and it happens every single time. And you'll notice he only throws that out every once in a while. And it's always very casual. He never does a rally or a big. None. It's always just kind of like, oh yeah, third. It's like, oh, maybe I deserve it. Like he just. This is part of his whole thing. I think the domestic response force is far more dangerous considering how ICE operations have gone and the fact that they're expanding now to Ohio, into Massachusetts, elsewhere. All of these things. It's a very off-putting and upsetting thing to do, and that's what Trump prefers. That's his whole thing. On the other side, I don't think Gavin Newsom is necessarily wrong. I think we are in a big gray zone in terms of what will be allowed and who, if anyone, can genuinely enforce to make sure rules are kept. The only institution that could stand up to Trump running to a third term and stop it are states who refuse to put him on the ballot. And and that's something where some may, others won't. How would that work? Because there's some states that will fall over to do it, other ones that will flatly say no. I mean, that's its own constitutional fight of its own. But when it comes to everything else and the way Trump plays the market, the way he plays favorites with business leaders, the way they suck up to him and completely collapse, in trying to gain favor with this man, all this type of thing, is an oligarchy. And the more and more stuff I see, like with the Trump brothers, Don and Eric, investing in this drone company to make drones for the war in Iran, it starts to smack of what goes on in Russia and other countries. And we've been very lucky to live in a country where, yeah, we spend too much on defense contracts and corporations do like to overcharge and all this type of thing, but it's not quite personal and overt. We do a better job of keeping it to a minimum and at least keeping it behind closed doors and trying to prosecute those who do, and people understanding that if it's ever exposed, there's serious federal crime, federal charges involved. That's starting to fade. And let me tell you, corruption's expensive. Ask anybody who lives in Russia or elsewhere. Corruption is expensive for the everyday person. And it manifests itself in all sorts of odd ways, and it makes everyone poorer. Right before this show, I was taping, because I'm always making content, I was taping a couple videos, and I was talking about austerity and how austerity makes everyone poorer. That video it's short, but it'll be out soon. The same dynamic is at play. With corruption. It makes everyone poorer. It's inefficiencies in the market. Having a strong legal background to stop that from happening saves everybody money over the long run, which is one of the problems with defense contracting. Anyway, I thought this video was interesting. I thought it was very over. I think it's something everyone should be concerned about, and if you're okay with that dynamic, I'd maybe have a think about that. Think about why you're okay with that. Um, this story dropped today. This one is going to be, well, this is difficult. So, on March 7th, Amir Balat, 18, and Ibrahim Kayumi, 19, from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, allegedly threw mason jar bombs packed with TATP explosive and shrapnel towards anti-Islam protesters outside Mayor Zoran Mamdani's residence. Balat lit the devices, one after taking it from Kayumi before police tackled them. Both pledged allegiance to ISIS upon arrest, with Balat boasting of plans bigger than the Boston Marathon bombing. They face federal charges, including material support to a terrorist group and using a weapon of mass destruction, as officials stress zero tolerance for such violence. I should mention that it was at Gracie Mansion, which is where the mayor lives. The bombs did not work. No one was meaningfully hurt, but there is some video, maybe, possibly. That's them being tackled now. They certainly tried it. Oh, there's one of the devices now. See, nothing happened. No one was hurt. But very disturbing nonetheless when you have people throwing devices that could have exploded and shouting their allegiance to ISIS and all this sort of thing. Oh, and this is the statement from Mayor Mamdani. Have been charged with committing a heinous act of terrorism and proclaiming allegiance to ISIS. They should be held fully accountable for their actions. We will continue to keep New Yorkers safe. We will not tolerate terrorism or violence. So it's yeah. So that happened over the weekend. That story didn't get enough attention because there's a lot of things going on, but yeah, they will yeah, I hope they like federal prison because they will be spending a lot of time there in the near future. I heard about the bombing first, but now we have names, numbers, locations, and the nature of the attacks. The interesting thing is that there was a protest outside the residence that were protesting against Islam and Islamification. And so it was, a basically Muslims attacking what was essentially kind of a right wing sort of protest, or just people against Islam and the spreading of Islam in America. And I'm sure every one of the people at that protest will still be convinced to keep protesting and keep saying against Islam after this. And this is definitely, it's moments like these that it's hard to say Islam is a religion of peace when this type of thing consistently keeps happening time and time and time again. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that story. Oh yes, this is good. So let's move on quickly to the Ticketmaster Live Nation settlement. So I wanted to grab this story real quick on the Cameron Journal because we had talked about last week on The Living Joke, which, if you're not watching The Living Joke, it's my Wednesday podcast with Will and Connor, and it's a lot more fun than this show because we talk about pop culture and fun things instead of the war in Iran like we do on this show. So, thelivingjoke.substack.com. You should check us out. We air 4 p.m. on Wednesdays. But we talked about the whole Live Nation Ticketmaster monopoly on ticket sales and how just going to concerts has become stupidly expensive. And they were in negotiations with the government because they are now one company, and so they quickly reached settlement terms today. And so it says here, the agreement, which requires a judicial sign-off, would avoid a breakup of the concert giant, but states that joined the suit object to the terms. It says here, the Justice Department said on Monday it had reached a tentative settlement of its antitrust litigation against Live Nation, the concert giant that includes Ticketmaster, a week into a high-profile trial that examined competition in the music industry. Under the terms of the deal, Live Nation agreed to change how it makes ticketing deals with venues, allowing them to use multiple vendors to sell tickets to fans rather than work with Ticketmaster exclusively, according to 3 people familiar with details of the agreement. In addition, the company would allow touring artists to use other promoters when performing in its amphitheaters, they said. Live Nation would also pay up to $280 million in damages to be split among the states that joined the settlement, according to the people familiar with the deal. who has to remain unnamed because they were not authorized to discuss it publicly. The Justice Department had accused Live Nation of operating an illegal monopoly that reaches into nearly every aspect of the multi-billion-dollar concert business. The company, the government said, stifles competition, pressures artists and venues into using its services, and drives up ticket prices for millions of fans. The suit had sought to break up the company by forcing it to divest Ticketmaster, whose merger with Live Nation had been allowed by the Justice Department in 2010. Live Nation denied those accusations, saying it faces a robust competitive market for its services, including ticketing, and that it does not threaten venues or artists. Dozens of state attorneys general had joined the Justice Department's lawsuit, which had been underway at Federal District Court in Manhattan. Some of them are now balking at the proposed settlement. In addition, the judge overseeing the case, who must approve any settlement, expressed frustration when the Justice Department and Live Nation revealed the existence of a deal in court Monday. Judge Arun Subramanian appeared angry when outside the presence of the jury, lawyers for both sides of the case told him they had signed a term sheet on Thursday. The judge noted that there had been no discussion of such an agreement when the parties met in his chambers on Friday morning. Quote, "It shows an absolute disrespect for the court, the jury, and this entire process," Judge Subramanian said. "It's absolutely unacceptable." After the proposed settlement was announced, lawyers representing some of the 39 states, along with the District of Columbia, who were involved in litigation, said they would seek a mistrial. New York's Attorney General Letitia James said in a statement that New York would continue legal action along with 25 other states and the District of Columbia. Quote, "We will keep fighting this case without the federal government," Ms. James said, "so that we can secure justice for all those harmed by Live Nation's monopoly." This has been a problem for quite some time. When Ticketmaster and Live Nation joined together way back in 2010, under the Obama administration, by the way, the consolidation in everything around ticketing kind of reached a fever pitch. There were some artists that tried to break out of using Ticketmaster, and almost all attempts kind of failed. The compromise is that for some artists, many artists, especially like stand-up comics, which is what I follow the most, you can buy tickets direct. They get so many tickets for themselves. You can buy kind of directly from them. Lewis Black, when he was still touring, had a private membership where you could get tickets to every venue, well ahead of time at reasonable prices. Kathleen Madigan does the same thing. Other major artists who tour do the same thing. But the reality is that Live Nation has complete vertical integration. They own most of the ticketing. They own a bunch of the venues, all the promotion. You can't use somebody else, all this type of thing. So I'm not quite sure where Live Nation says the competition's coming from, because they've driven it all out of the market. I'm sure they're talking about like, oh, but what about the resellers? That's not competition. That's you getting paid once for the price of the tickets, and then them making thousands of dollars on arbitrage. That's not competition. So this actually gives an opening for a major tech player like Amazon to come in and start selling tickets, or Apple, or anybody. I guarantee you there are people at Amazon who are looking at this and being like, Amazon tickets, like, sort of thing. I'm sure there's other people in tech that are looking, I'm sure other people start, other companies, other apps, all this type of thing. I think that end of it will be good, but the fact that they're still together and they really should be broken up, because Live Nation is the touring and Ticketmaster is the ticketing, I think that they should still be separate companies. That deal should have never gone through, and it was remarked upon at the time. So I just wanted to bring it up because we talked about it on The Living Joke, and I wanted to kind of do the more serious legal stuff. So because with Will and Connor, we just have fun. That's the whole point of that show, is we have fun. So, turning our attention to the Epstein files. Interesting news on that today. And remember how I said to save that well. According to Brian Allen here, my favorite reporter, in a video from MS Now, which will come back in a second, it says the Trump administration has announced it will not release any more Epstein files. More than half of 6 million documents remain sealed. Pam Bondi's response: the DOJ is done. And then he says, the deputy AG admitted they withheld images showing death, physical abuse, and injury. Names redacted, images hidden, half the documents sealed forever. A war started the week the files dropped. 7 Americans dead, $2 trillion erased from markets, the draft on the table. And Pam Bondi just told Congress and the American people, you don't get to see the rest. And so let's watch this brief segment from MS Now to find out a little bit more.
We'll start with the growing backlash and political backlash, rather Republican political backlash, against what one lawmaker is now labeling the Epstein administration. After Attorney General Pam Bondi said the DOJ is done releasing the Epstein files, even though roughly half of the 6 million documents they have are still under wraps. Even Republicans are incensed, including Senator John Kennedy, who said this weekend the Justice Department needs to, quote, release everything. South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace tweeted, quote, the days of cover-up are over, a sentiment echoed. We'll start with the growing backlash and political backlash, rather Republican political backlash.
All right. So, I thought that was, I'm not surprised because when we got the last really big dump, they said that was it. According to the release file, they do have to justify every redaction and submit those to Congress. So I imagine there will be hearings going through different redactions and why certain things were and were not redacted when they actually got the redactions right, which oftentimes they didn't. I'm sure there'll be other questions around what was or was not released and why. A lot of people are pointing out that still there's no charges, there's no prosecutions. We've talked about why that is. Not that I necessarily agree with that, but we've talked about why that is. And this announcement, which is just kind of flying under the radar of everything else because all the rest of these tabs are Iran. Flying under the radar of everything else, is quite haunting. Another video that I was editing today, it was called the Epstein the Everything Conspiracy. And it's just there's so much more to know and understand, considering the tentacles of this man went so far. And he was involved in so many things. Really looking forward to trying to learn more. And I'm disappointed that this is it because there's still a lot of questions to ask, to answer, to find out how far this went and for who. And right now, the only people who are really having any consequences are overseas. No one of note in this country has been arrested in any meaningful way. And so, Nancy Mace, you may say the age of the cover-up is over, but at this point with this administration, what are you really going to do about it? I will say that, I understand holding back, some of the images and all this type of thing. I get that. But I feel like out of 6 million documents, they're not all images. There's other stuff there that could be released, but it implicates certain people. People who can't necessarily be thrown under the bus. So, yeah, very disappointing. Very, very disappointing. I think socially and online, this isn't going to go away. I think they hope it will. But when you have memes like this floating around by everybody, Republican, Democrat, everyone in between, I don't think this gambit's going to work. And it's extremely disappointing to get to this point and not be able to find out what exactly happened. And, as I wrote in the newsletter on Sunday, figure out how to make sure it never happens ever again. When all this is over, the war in Iran, Epstein, everything, we're going to have to work very hard to make sure that this never happens in this country ever again. And there's a big conversation coming up, constitutionally, institutionally, at every level, to prevent this from happening ever again. And we're going to have to change a lot about things in this country. And I think this is going to be a quiet battle cry that's quite sticky on the Epstein files. So, before the show gets too late, let's dive into Iran. So let's level set. We have bombings on Sunday of oil infrastructure in Tehran and Isfahan. This is Isfahan, Iran. Let me change my graphic. Epstein files latest. We're gonna go over to Iran. 10 points if you can recognize that that song. Oh, hello, Noah Jordan 305. Thank you for stopping by and watching. We love you for coming. Nothing too much. We're just discussing headlines here, so stick with us. Um, so let's just level set here with the New York Times, and we'll get into some of the other details. So, it says here, the volley of Israeli missiles that slammed into a government compound in central Tehran last Saturday morning was, by any military standard, a successful opening strike by the United States and Israel as they went to war with Iran. The blast killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as well as a cadre of other senior military and intelligence officials. The war's first salvo left Iran without many of its top commanders to lead the response. The reckoning, it turned out, was more complicated. The Israeli strike also killed another group of Iranian officials who had been meeting in a different part of the compound. Among them were people the White House had identified as more willing to negotiate than their bosses, who might help bring a swift end to the conflict, according to American officials. The strike on the compound in Tehran was emblematic of the muddled reality of the war's first week, a withering air campaign by American and Israeli forces against an overwhelmed enemy, but few answers about what victory might look like. Iran, its government still in place, has remained defiant and expanded the battlefield across the region, inflicting the first American casualties of the conflict. Even as senior administration officials in the United States spent the week trying to narrowly cast the war's goals around denying Iran any chance of getting a nuclear weapon, President Trump has bounced wildly between wildly divergent explanations for what he hopes to achieve. In his first message after the war began, Mr. Trump called for a mass uprising in Iran against the country's leaders. In subsequent days, with little evidence that Iranians were moving to overthrow their own government, and with intelligence reports concluding that the clerical regime would likely hold on to power, he indicated he cared little about Iran's future after the military campaign ends. Then, on Friday, he said he would be directly involved in choosing Iran's future leader and indicated he was committing the United States to Iran's long-term future. And in a bellicose social media statement on Saturday morning, Mr. Trump warned Iran that, quote, areas and groups of people that were not considered for targeting up until this moment in time might now be targeted by the United States and Israel. The changing narratives have whipsawed the American public, which polls show broadly opposes the war. At the same time, the spreading violence is triggering rising oil prices and other economic shocks that could bring further election year political problems for Mr. Trump and the Republican Party at home. The war's first week had echoes of the past. For the first time since World War II, an American submarine destroyed an enemy ship using a torpedo, and it provided glimpses of the future. The Pentagon employed artificial intelligence to help pick its targets. Interviews with dozens of officials in the United States, Israel, Iran, and across the Middle East suggest that while American and Israeli military capabilities have proven to be overwhelming during the war's first 7 days, the violence that has metastasized across the region could yield all manner of fraught outcomes. And we'll get into that. This is a very long article. We're not going to read the whole thing. I just wanted to level set. But I do want to come down here to the idea of no endgame. It says, during the first days of the war, both Mr. Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel suggested that the real change in Iran would come from within, with mass protests on the streets toppling a government made weaker by the military campaign. That has not yet happened, and Mr. Trump has changed his public position by the day or the hour about just how big a role the United States would be in trying to engineer Iran's political future. On Friday, he said he would be happy if Iran was left with an autocratic religious leader after the war, as long as the new leadership treated the United States and Israel, quote, fairly, unquote. Inside the White House, officials had identified some pragmatic Iranian officials who they believed would be convinced to negotiate a relatively quick end to the war if the upper echelon of Iranian leadership were killed. The White House saw the potential Iranian negotiating partners not as so much as moderates, but as people who would have self-interest in remaining in power, even if it meant reaching a deal with the United States for the end of hostilities. And so, and it goes into comparing the last 12-day war, and there was an appointment of a new leader today, Ali Khamenei's son. We'll get into that as well. But with that as a baseline, I want to dive into some of the interesting things that are happening. We actually don't need this around this war. So, as we know, drones have been an increasing part of Iran's strategy coming out of the last series of strikes in the last 12-day war. They've been using drones extensively. Well, Ukraine also uses drones extensively, and so does Russia, and Ukraine has gotten very good at intercepting drones. The Trump administration has drafted Ukraine into helping us in Iran with drone technology. Says here, Ukraine is now sending help to the Persian Gulf, aiding Gulf states and the U.S. to protect their military bases from Iranian suicide drones with cheap Ukrainian interceptor drones, because the Patriot missiles that we use to defend against drones cost way more than the drones or even the Shahed missiles. And remember that, because we're going to come back to that too. But this was just an interesting sort of thing, and there's a brief Fox News clip.
This multi-layered strategy counters Iran, which seemingly is trying to flood the zone with these cheap $35,000 Shahed drones until the Gulf states run out of expensive counter-drone munitions like the $4 million Patriot missiles. Ukraine is also helping to fight Iran's drones. This is an ad for the Sting. It's a Ukrainian drone interceptor, a quadcopter that hunts and takes down Iranian drones. Ukraine and the UK have also developed an AI-powered interceptor called the Octopus, which has reportedly been discussed by the Gulf states in this war. Ukraine is an expert at drone fighting, dealing with swarms of Iranian drones fired by the Russians.
So I'd say...
Yes, and as the top tweet says, Ukraine has not provided more military aid to the U.S. this year than the U.S. has provided to Ukraine. So it's, yeah, so that's, yeah, this is dragging in everybody either materially or existentially. And a drone carrier was also shot down. And this kind of shows the starkness of the cost. So Patriot missiles are $4 million per missile. The Shahed drone is $35,000, and Ukraine's interceptor drone is $3,000 with off-the-shelf parts that they now make in Ukraine. And so that back and forth with the drones and the drones striking refining facilities in Qatar, in Bahrain, all this sort of thing, has now created the situation where, one, we can't really make Patriot missiles as fast as we're using them because the metallurgy and everything takes months to increase production, all this sort of thing. And so we're basically pulling in all the favors to figure this out. And so we now have a situation where this war is economic, it's drones, it's AI, it's also planes, it's ships, but not really. It's a war on multiple fronts using multiple tools where cost becomes a factor. And all the people in Ukraine who said, yeah, the age of, the drone wars are here, and the new strategy is going to be build lots of drones, build them cheap, and flood the zone so it's almost impossible or very hard to defend against them, is shown itself in Ukraine and is now showing itself in Iran versus the United States and the rest of the Gulf. Yeah, if we're not planning on adding significant drone stocks to at least water ship-based platforms, all this type of thing, the Pentagon should really start thinking about that, because we're seeing the future of conflict in the world, and it includes cheap drones, not expensive missile systems. Now, to my point, I talked ahead of my stories. So, today, this was this morning, Iran hit a U.S. oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz with a Shahed 136 drone. And it talks about the cost, and it goes through how, all of the cost of defending against this is just too high without using very inexpensive drones. And then it also gets into how, Lloyd's of London is no longer insuring tanker traffic traveling through the Strait of Hormuz, so ships can't go through with any surety that they will be insured if they're fired upon. And so that means that they can't go through the Strait of Hormuz, which basically means all the oil and gas that usually pass through there are stuck on the wrong side of the strait. And then also, removes 20 million barrels per day of oil. So the price of oil, it already hit 120 today, which means gas prices will be going up. And there's a picture of the ship hit by the drone and how much it is on fire. So the drone situation, that's the future of this, and that's going to become an increasing problem as Iran seeks to expand the war throughout the region. This was a bit of Iranian propaganda. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force Commander Majid Mousavi said, quote, after neutralizing U.S. air defense layers in the region, Iran is transitioning to a new missile doctrine. From now on, no missiles carrying warheads lighter than 1 ton will be used. Waves of missile attacks will be more frequent and more widespread, he says. And this is Iran showing off all their stuff buried in tunnels in places. This is Iranian state video, so bear that in mind. They chose good music, I'll say. Oh, there's more of those small drones. I mean, I think it's important to remember this is a regime that has been anticipating this moment for 40 years. This exact scenario is exactly what their war plans have planned on. And look, it's all packed, all ready to go. They just grab the trailer with a little truck and away it goes. So, moving right along. Oh, this was about... So, Trump has floated that they might bring back the draft if they have to invade Iran with ground troops. And I saved this because I thought it was prescient. And I think certainly surmises public sentiment and somewhat my own sentiment as well. And scissor from Tom Joseph. There's not going to be a draft. Trump doesn't have the authority to order a draft. There's not going to be a ground invasion to take over Iran. We don't have the equipment or the 10 million troops required to do it. Iran isn't going to surrender either. Trump is using that stupid language because he's lost and confused. Trump miscalculated every aspect of the Iran attack. He's unprepared, thoughtless, inexperienced, compromised, desperate, and rotting from dementia. It's obvious from Trump's comments that he has no idea what he's doing. He's making up shit as he goes along. He winged it to keep Epstein off the front pages. The loss of even one U.S. service member's life is not worth this debacle. An 86-year-old psycho, supreme leader who would have died anyway, was killed and is being replaced with his son. The destruction of their infrastructure is not worth the damage being done to U.S. bases, personnel, and the world economy. These are the consequences of the U.S. electing a compromised criminal traitor with dementia who was rightfully disqualified from even running. Okay, well, let's put the end to one side. That's a very overt opinion. But the idea that Iran's going to surrender is quite unlikely given the fact that they've literally survived the loss of the top third of their leadership, and they're still going, still kicking. You know, their government is still continuing. There's new people in charge and they're figuring it out. But I think especially when it comes to the whole idea of we did this to get the Epstein files off, I think people are kind of driving with that. I think Trump, as is typical, as I said earlier, like with the third term, he likes to throw stuff out to get people talking about it. That's another one. It's like, well, let's get people talking. You know, it gets people talking. It keeps it, you know, it keeps the narrative going. It gets everyone afraid. Again, on the back foot, upset, off kilter, don't know what's next. That's the Trump playbook. He keeps you on your toes and constantly insecure so that he remains in control. That's the Trump pattern. And this is another manifestation of it. Oh, this wonderful map. So, I wanted to show everybody kind of where the attacks are happening and why. So the ones in red and orange are U.S. and Israeli strikes, and the ones in purple are Iran/Hezbollah strikes, which stretch from way down here in Oman and into the UAE, up into Qatar, into Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, into Iraq, northern Iraq, a little dot there in Azerbaijan, over here in Turkey, obviously Israel, Cyprus, Jordan, all this type of thing. The fatalities reported so far in Iran are 1,300, Lebanon 300, Israel 12, U.S. troops 6, and others 36, including some minor deaths in Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, Bahrain, and Oman. It says here that the IDF estimates 120 Iranian missile launchers remaining, warns it will pursue any successor to Supreme Leader as assembly of experts prepares to gather in Guam. It also is important to note that Russia is supplying intelligence, satellite imagery, and targeting information to Iran, which is, you know, turnabout is fair play with what the U.S. does to Ukraine sort of thing. And so this was an interesting sort of, to get a visual idea. Basically, this conflict has plunged the entire Middle East into war. this is not going to stop and continue. There, what may or may not happen offensively remains to be seen at this time. There's a lot of calls on Gulf states to not just defend themselves against Iran, but to actively assist in taking down Iran. That also, there's been weak response in that so far. But I wanted to show everyone the scope of what is happening. This is a huge, huge area. And this is the Great War in the Middle East we always feared would happen. I studied this in grad school, and this is almost exactly the worst case scenario that we imagined. And here we are. Thank God nobody there has any nuclear weapons, because that would just make that whole problem worse. This was the story about the drone company. We're not going to stop there, but Don and Eric are investing in a new drone company to get new contracts from the Pentagon. And was a story about it. That's from Occupy Democrats. Oh yes. So when it comes to messaging and how uncoordinated the messaging feels, this was Marco Rubio this morning at 10 a.m. when I was preparing for the show on what success in the Iran war looks like. Let's listen.
The goals of this mission are clear, and it's important to continue to remind the American people why it is that the greatest military in the history of the world is engaged in this operation. It is to destroy the ability of this regime to launch missiles, both by destroying their missiles and their launchers, destroy the factories that make these missiles, and destroy their navy. The goals of this mission are clear.
So we've gone from regime change to not launching missiles and no more navy. It's moving goalposts. The end game and what is actually going to happen is a moving goalpost, and it threatens to be a bit of a boondoggle. This reminds me a little bit of what happened to Reagan in the early 80s after the bombing of the Beirut Marine Barracks. We had gone in there to secure things in Lebanon and to help Israel. They blew up the Marine Barracks. It was actually one of the first major suicide bomb attacks ever, after Assad's father had invented that in Syria. And the Marines had been pulled out in 2 weeks after it happened. This is starting to have Beirut and 83 vibes to it. We'll move the goalpost till we find something that we think is acceptable to get ourselves out of something we should have never gotten ourselves into. We're already at that phase. And this is literally when Marco Rubio did this at 10 o'clock this morning. President Trump was already posting other things on Truth Social. So clearly, Marco didn't call the White House first to find out what he was saying. Or Trump is just trying to make everyone look foolish, because he does like to do that, because he has remaining control. An interesting thing about the bombing of the school, there was a school, as everybody knows, a school on an Iranian base that was hit by an Iran in an IRGC compound. And the latest analysis, this is actually video. The latest analysis seems to indicate that it's not a Tomahawk missile because it is flying incorrectly. So it says here, A1 analysis confirms the wings of the munition in question sit around 40 to 45% down the body of the munition. On a Tomahawk, the wings sit at 49 to 50% down the body of the munition. The wing-to-body ratio of the munition is in question matches an Iranian Kh-55 derived land attack cruise missile. Further, the video shows the munition a steep dive angle for the final attack phase. This places the attack angle at approximately 70%, which is the max attack angle for a Tomahawk. The attack angle does not match the Kh-55. That angle maxes out at about 55 degrees. So what would have caused this? The wing positioning alone makes the munition impossible to be a Tomahawk. The attack angle at the max of the Tomahawk's capabilities. The typical attack angle for a Tomahawk is much lower than 70 degrees. The typical angle is between 25 and 45 degrees. This is due to the flight pattern of Tomahawks. They fly very low, horizontally to the ground, and often only 50 to 100 meters to avoid detection and interception. In order to achieve that attack angle, the missile would have to gain altitude several kilometers away. This leaves it vulnerable for interceptions. It's highly unlikely on the first day of U.S. attacks. So, what could have caused this? Simply put, GPS jamming on an Iranian Kh-55. The USA and Israel were and continue to actively jam Iranian airspace. If the Kh-55's signal was jammed, this could result in an uncontrollable dive. Think of GPS jamming more like disorienting the missile. President Trump said, no, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran. So it appears the school was possibly, maybe, blown up accidentally by a lost Iranian missile. Still a terrible tragedy, but we may not have accidentally killed 165 people. So wanted to put that out there, especially when there's videos and pictures and some analysis that I thought was interesting. So it's yeah. I found it compelling and worth thinking about. And so in conclusion, as we bring the news hour to a close and bring this whole discussion to a close, today President Trump said that the war would be over soon, and it was going ahead of schedule. He called into Fox News to let us know this, and so we'll, or no, when someone's reading this, he didn't call in. Here we go.
And in that interview with Wei Zhejiang, he said, I think the war is very complete, pretty much. They have no Navy, no communications, they've got no Air Force. He added that the U.S. is, quote, very far ahead of the initial 4 to 5 week estimated time frame. And then with that, we bring in, and in that interview.
Yeah, and so it's, it says here, Trump told CBS that he's ahead of schedule on the 4 to 5 week war timeline and says that the U.S. should take over the Strait of Hormuz. Two things are happening simultaneously. The retreat ahead of schedule means the regime change didn't happen. The regime is standing. A harder, younger supreme leader is in place. Trump is now reframing failure as a timeline. Contrast this with what Marco Rubio said. The escalation taking over the Strait of Hormuz means a permanent U.S. naval occupation of a 21 nautical mile choke point surrounded by Iranian coastline. Iran has thousands of Shahed drones remaining, each cost $20,000. Each U.S. Patriot missile costs $4 million. The Iranian coastline would give them a point-blank range on every U.S. ship in the strait. Iran called it, you enter the strait, you become sitting ducks. Oil is at $110. Iran is threatening $200. 7 Americans are dead. The draft is on the table. Sleeper cells activated globally. And Trump is now talking about occupying the world's most strategically contested waterway. So, this also contrasts with what's going to happen here. Times of Israel says that he's working specifically with Prime Minister Netanyahu to decide when it is convenient for them to end the war and the strikes. The president was asked whether he alone would decide when the war with Iran ends, if Netanyahu would also have a say. Quote, the president said, I think it's mutual a little bit. We've been talking. I'll make a decision at the right time, but everything's going to be taken into account. Asked whether Israel could continue the war against Iran even after the U.S. decides to halt the strikes, Trump declined to entertain the theoretical possibility before adding, quote, I don't think it's going to be necessary, unquote. Trump has sought to avoid being locked down to a specific timeline for the war, but the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said Friday that Washington expects it to last 4 to 6 weeks, which is funny because it was supposed to be 4 days. But anyway, that's the moving target on this conflict that we are going through. So that's so let's bring this all together. Because we've gone through a lot. A lot. We have a conflict here that we can argue about its necessity or whether it was really needed, but the reality is Israel started it, the US joined in, the UK may also be joining in at some point, if they haven't already. As a result of that, the entire region is now plunged into war, and the White House is desperately searching for an off-ramp, and they keep doing things and saying things that make off-ramps less likely. Iran is not interested in the ceasefire negotiations right now. They're not taking the calls. There is a complete breakdown in the messaging of what all of this is, what is happening, and why. And we have really no clue what's going on. But the big moral of the story is we're not talking about the Epstein files. And that may have been the whole point. In writing about all this with AI and Claude and drones and Iran's bombing data centers to stop the AI and missiles and cost, and it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. But I will say what's not overwhelming, and that is American support for the war in Iran, which sits at a balmy 27%. There's not a lot of enthusiasm for this conflict. There's not a lot of enthusiasm for this war, and why would there be? The No More Wars president may be getting us into another situation that we cannot easily extricate ourselves from. Bearing in mind, Iran is surrounded by mountains on three sides, which offensively makes things very difficult for them, but defensively is amazing. The north has the Caspian Sea, and mountains are east and west, and so the most of Iran lives in the flat plain between those mountain ranges. That's one of the cradles of civilization, foundation of the Persian Empire. And so yeah, you have but defensively it's really great because you can really only get there easily by air. Any sort of land invasion is going to be taking place from the sea. Invading Iran is an incredibly difficult thing. I remember years ago there was a graphic saying why Iran was worried, and it was because at that time we had so many bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were basically surrounded on two sides. And Iran is basically willing to, go against all of these threats with drones, with missiles, with whatever it has to defend itself, because this is existential for them. If they don't pull it all out and do their very best, their regime will not exist, eventually at some point. And so I think, honestly, this is I kind of laugh because two of the great conflicts that I always thought would happen one day when I was in grad school studying international relations have occurred. And this is by far the more dangerous of the two. And like I said, you're going to be feeling this one immediately. Shortages are going to be on the table. Domestic attacks are not without question, or not without out of their own possibility. There's a TikTok, YouTube, Instagram creator named Youth Pastor Ryan who has a master's degree in Homeland Security, very similar to my master's degree, which is in diplomacy and terrorism and asymmetrical warfare. And he was talking about how to prepare for the possibility of domestic attacks. This is going to get very real and very nasty. I don't think there's a lot of really great ways out. And that should be very concerning. So, anyway, it's been a long day. It's been a long week. And this has been a long show. So, let's bring the plane into a landing. I want to thank you all so much for watching. This has been the Cameron Journal Newshour. I am Cameron Cowan. Thank you so much for watching. You can catch us online at Cameron Cowan, at TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, at Cameron Journal, on Blue Sky, and TikTok. And Facebook, just look up my name. I pop right up. I want to remind everyone to come back Wednesday for The Living Joke. And with Connor and we'll be here. And we're going to talk about the Mario Galaxy movie because they announced voice actors and production pictures today, so that'll be fun. And hopefully, fingers crossed, Brian McMillan from Woke Word Wars will also be on this week, although I have not confirmed with him yet, so we'll see about that. This week's interview is really great. The interview that's already come out is with publishing and the publishing industry with Terry Whalen. So if you're one of my writing people who wants to find out more about traditional publishing, that is a must-watch interview. If you're curious about your astrology, for the year of the Fire Horse, I talked with Altazar, who's been a friend of mine, who's an expert astrologer for 15 years. Well, he's been in astrology for 30 years. I've been his friend for 15 years. So that's up right now. And then later this week, we're also going to be talking writing and publishing with Juliette Rose, who's a great independent author that I had a chance to speak to. So that's what's coming up this week on the Cameron Journal, on the podcast. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you next week on the Cameron Journal Newshour. Good night now.